Recently, there was an announcement on the Netflix Geek Twitter account showing that an animated MTG TV show is in production, and I've wanted to do a video on that topic for a bit. So, while my other content is in the kiln, here are my thoughts, fears, and predictions. But before we get going, let's do a quick disclaimer. This video is pure speculation. I don't have any inside information, and I'll be using my own research and knowledge of the game. If I make any mistakes, feel free to correct me. Also, while I'm not an expert on Magic Story by any means, there may be spoilers in this video, so keep that in mind. If you want a really fun, comprehensive summary of Magic Story, check out Spice8rack's video on the matter. The link is in the description. Let's get going. Alright, let's rip this band-aid off early. It won't be Yu-Gi-Oh! By which I mean it won't be a show about people playing the Magic the Gathering card game. While I could see the possibility of them trying a Yu-Gi-Oh! Style show like they did with Duel Masters, I don't think MTG is a good fit for that. This is mostly because Magic is just too complicated. Many rules and mechanics have been added, changed, disregarded, and stayed the same in Magic's 31-year run. So if they went the card game route for the show, a lot of it would be spent catching people up. So, is it possible? Sure, it could be done. But doing so would mean having to explain how the card game works, inventing new characters to play the game, all for the sake of probably tying it into the existing MTG story anyway. I'm fairly confident they'll just tell the card game story instead, especially since we can see Ajani in the announcement poster. Speaking of the announcement poster, let's focus on the characters in it, namely Ajani and Chandra. For a while I was guessing who the second character was until I made the incredible move to get a bigger picture, and yeah, that's Chandra. These two are an interesting pair to head a TV show, since it could be about their initial meeting on Kaladesh to fight Tezzeret just before Ajani enters the Gatewatch, or it could be post-War of the Spark. Both of which would be wild first looks into the world of Magic for any newcomer. Now, of course, they could just make an original story using these two characters, maybe with some juicy show-only cards to sell afterwards. But let's pretend we're optimists for a second and assume they'll use Magic's established story instead. Starting with Ajani's first meeting with Chandra, fighting alongside the Renegades on Kaladesh. The show's writers will have the task of explaining who Tezzeret is, what Ajani's beef with him is, how Nissa and Chandra know each other, what the Gatewatch is, all while setting up Amonkhet where Nicol Bolas currently holds power. All in all, an incredible info dump for anyone who hasn't played Magic or just isn't familiar with the story. On the other hand, focusing on just the Kaladesh story means not having to worry too much about the other planes, and larger conflicts can be slowly introduced through the relatively small one on the plane. To me, going post-War of the Spark would be far weirder. Seriously, if Kaladesh is an info dump, this would be an info avalanche. Chandra, at this point in her story, is dealing with the death of Gideon Jura and what she believes is the death of Liliana Vess. So we're gonna have to explain who the hell those people are. Plus, I can't imagine people being okay with missing War of the Spark. It was an enormous conflict, the climax of several plotlines and the end of one of Magic's most well-known villains. To be fair, post-war Chandra and Ajani could have some wonderful, emotionally driven character moments, but who would care if you don't know these characters? But what if they don't? Stick with me here, but what if this is a sneak peek at future events, and they actually pick the show up from the formation of the Gatewatch, potentially as a flashback? It seems silly, sure, but it makes a hell of a lot more sense than jumping into the middle of Ajani's story, or skipping War of the Spark entirely. I think it would also provide a more solid springboard for people to get into Magic. You could introduce the concept of Planeswalkers and the color pie more easily, since the founding members of the Gatewatch are all Planeswalkers and each represent a color from said pie. Plus, you could set up future arcs, like Sarkhan reviving Ugin and Nahiri and Sorin bringing in Innistrad with War of the Spark as the series climax. This is a less in-depth video than I intended on this topic, but the announcement kind of took me off guard. While I can understand that Ajani and Chandra are beloved characters, pairing them seems like a really weird decision based on when they met in Magic's chronology. This show, the Magic the Gathering show, shouldn't only be for us, and I can't help but think that dropping people into the middle of or just after major conflicts would alienate a larger audience. You shouldn't have to do homework just to get into it. My bet is that they'll either go with an original story or the flash-forward concept I mentioned. It makes way more sense to me than tossing viewers into the deep end lore-wise, and Ajani and Chandra being together on the poster could just be to drum up hype. As for how they'd structure either option, that's a video for another time. For now, what do you think the show is going to be about? I'm a little hesitant with my expectations, if it even survives the production process, but who knows? It could be anything from a soulless money grab to the next Arcane. And while you're down in the comments, make sure you say thank you to our patrons Dorian, Liam Anderson, and Discordance for making this content possible. Stay safe, stay watching, and stay magical. So long.